Hello and welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Janai and this is Karmic Fixer Tarot. And thank you so much for watching. I'm building a catalog of these videos on YouTube. So I don't think I have quite, was it 100 or 1,000 watch hours yet. So the channel's building steadily. So if you're watching, I appreciate your viewership. And it's just a tiny little bit of housekeeping. Depending on if you've seen some of the earlier videos, um, I think I've got my mic situation set up so that I'm not clanging against my little zodiac necklace and whatnot. But anyway, so if you've sat through those videos, I appreciate your watching them. And these videos will continue to grow, maybe get more polished, maybe not, who knows. But I appreciate your viewership. And preamble over, I'm just going to get right into it. I think this video is going to be, and again, over the past few videos, I've been prefacing it by giving maybe a disclaimer a little bit on the content. My past few videos have had a political leaning to them, whether they've been about the president, whether they've been about war, whether they've been about MAGA or ex-MAGA. And that really wasn't necessarily my intention for these videos to, take kind of a political slant. But politics is definitely a very, politics touches everything. And more in these heightened, just kind of chaotic times, it is something that I think about more than I ever have. So that's always been at least over the past several months, politics have been of high curiosity for me. And I find myself asking spirit all kinds of political questions. And the questions aren't necessarily for predicting the future, but to just kind of help me get a little more grounded. Just kind of sort through my feelings, get some insight from the universe, and carry that forward. And that's what these videos have been. And I think that's what today's video might be about also. Of late, just kind of seeing the escalation in Iran, this ballooning into a all-out war. I dare say a world war. Those are scary words to put together, world and war, because of the devastation that the first two world wars have had, throughout the globe. So that kind of feels like where we're headed, if not where we already are. And I live in the US and our media is really letting us down. Our mainstream media is concealing more, I think, or spinning more than we, the public, are getting, or that didn't come out exactly the way. There's more going on, I think, than our media is making us aware of. And yeah, these are strange times throughout the world and strange times here in the US where I am. So I've been thinking about the US military. That's been, I guess, the crown jewel of American imperialism. And from what I've been seeing in other news sources online, independent media, it does look like the US military has bit off more than they can chew, or more to the point, our president has bit off more than he can chew. And without trying to be too alarmist, it really feels like he's setting our military, our service members up to be cannon fodder. I mean, I know that's kind of a harsh way to put it, but I think that is something that, if I'm being honest, I'm a little scared about. So I figure I'd consult the cards and see what comes out. I'm wondering how the military is feeling about the situation that we're in. Military, their families, knowing that this war that's highly unpopular, it's highly illegal and unwarranted, just a pure war of aggression, that our service members are being sent to fight at the whim and will of somebody who's chaotic, somebody who doesn't appreciate the military, somebody who has no respect for the military. But the people who sign up to serve, protect their country and whatnot, they're caught in the mix of all of this. So I was a little concerned about that. I'm wondering how our service members and their families are feeling, how they're coping. So I wanted to do a reading on that. I was watching something very interesting on YouTube. If I remember, I'm going to link it in the description of this video. Um, Someone who works for the, I can't remember the exact name of the particular organization, but this organization helps service members um, to become conscientious objectors. It helps service members if they're about to be deployed and they have conscientious objections. They have moral conviction against this particular war, or of course, in the past, people who've had objections to wars that they've deemed unjust, because of either their religion or their political philosophy, or just their own personal ethical code, their own moral code. And this video speaks with somebody who was an Iraq war veteran who now works for this organization, helping service members with options as to how to be conscientious objectors, especially of this particular military action. So I thought that was very fascinating, and that really got me to thinking about the military, the men and women who serve, and the men and women who are going to be called on to put their lives on the line for a war that we have no business waging. My opinion. But anyway, so I have two decks that I like, and these might be separate videos. But I have two decks that I was thinking about as far as doing a reading. My readings tend to be 3-card, sort of advice from the universe. My content can be a little long form, and I don't necessarily want it to be too long. I want these to be digestible and insightful. Um, but I am curious. I think the first deck that I'm going to consult, and if I consult my second deck, I'll just make that a second video. I don't want to hold you guys for too long. But this is the Jungian tarot deck. The artist, his name is Robert Wong, and this is actually the first tarot deck that I purchased. Um, One of the things that drew me to tarot was learning about Jungian psychology and learning about how Carl Jung used tarot as like psychological archetypes to help help his patients and to help students, or to help the people he was working with to understand different psychological archetypes as represented through tarot as a means of self-reflection and just kind of being introspective about oneself. And so while I'm not an expert in Jungian psychology, and it's something I'd love to learn more about, that's one of the things that got me interested in tarot. So this is a deck, I guess, that's steeped in Jungian psychology. Hold on for a moment, I'm being disturbed. Okay, I was a little interrupted there. I don't live by myself, so there's a lot of background sounds, and my brother poking his head in. But anyway, let me see if I can regain my train of thought. Oh, yes. Anyway, this deck is inspired by Jungian psychology, and there's probably a lot of imagery that would avail itself more to me if I was more schooled in Jungian psychology. But I do tend to get a lot from this deck anyway. This was the first deck I bought, and then I wound up getting a Rider-Waite-Smith deck, and that's kind of what I've been learning on. But I do like this deck. It's slightly different, of course, to the Rider-Waite-Smith, but I guess that's beside the point. I'm kind of just rambling. I do a lot of that in my videos. So the main thing I want to connect with Source on, connect with Spirit on, is I would like to see some insight into U.S. military right now, the service members, their mindset, how they're feeling. Do they agree? What's kind of a temperature, I guess, / vibe check, the military? How are they dealing with this very stressful time? Is there overall support? Is there overall condemnation for it? Are they split? Just kind of want to know. So you do a quick little shuffle, do a quick little cut. Give me a temperature check or vibe check on the U.S. military, particularly the individual service members. What's an insight that you can give me on how they're dealing? I'm laying out my 3 cards. This is going to be an advice from the universe deck. Pardon my eye rubs. Yeah, I should probably practice video editing more and take out those little parts. But anyway, that's beside the point. Okay, so my first card with the 3-card spread, the first card is what to know. So let's take a look. Is the Chariot card. Now, this seems very appropriate. What to know. Since this is the U.S. military, by and large, service members they're going to go. A lot of them are, unless there's, I guess, a deep moral conviction against this war. They'll probably be military service members who conscientiously object or think about objecting. But I feel like by and large, if and when our service members are deployed, there are some grumblings about this becoming a ground war. You know, the whole proverbial boots on the ground. And if and when that happens, and that's looking more and more like a win, our service members will be the ones to go because that's what they signed up for. And on some level, if you join the military, that's what you believe in, that's what you want to do. You want to protect the homeland, you want to protect and serve your nation. And there's a certain degree of trust that has to go into being a service member and committing to being a part of the military. So maybe this card represents just being duty bound to do that work. You might have your misgivings, you might have your objections, or you might not. And of course, this is, that's a reminder that every service member is an individual, not necessarily looking at a monolith. So I think this card reminds me that when you join the military, when you commit to give your time, your body, just yourself to the military, when you sign up to be a part of it, that's what you do. And you go and you have a sense of duty. And looking at the Chariot here, let's see. Now, some of the interpretations of the major arcana cards in the Jungian deck are a little different to how they'd be interpreted in standard tarot, particularly the Rider-Waite-Smith. And this particular Chariot card seems to be the embodiment of Mercury. And Mercury seems to be, and I'm still learning astrology, but from what I'm learning about Mercury, Mercury is the sign of communication, sign of, what you say, what you communicate to others. And Mercury can also be, mercurial. There's that sort of changeability and whatnot. So our military, our service members will proceed by and large because that's their duty. But things can also change. You proceed forward and, you need to be in a space of adaptability. And I think the Chariot, as represented in this particular deck, as it is the embodiment, I guess, of Mercury, I think that stands to reason that our service members, they've had, especially if they're being deployed to active duty, they've had the training, they are prepared by and large for military activity. All kinds of things change. Sometimes you don't necessarily know what you're getting into until you get into it. But I think this represents that our service members are highly trained and they can adapt to the situation. They will be willing to adapt to the situation and they'll go forward with what they know and they'll pivot as they need to pivot. And I guess that's kind of the idea, I guess, of military. I don't really know from military action, being a military family or anything like that. I don't really have that experience. But based on this card, it's one thing to remember that when you join any military, you're not you're there's a degree to which your eyes are open, or if they weren't open before you joined, they're open as you go through training, as you gain the skills, or as you meet the metrics to be qualified for um, active duty, I guess, being um, in active combat or whatnot. Because not everybody who joins the military is out there on the front lines, active combat or whatnot. But the ones who are, they do have the training, they do have a certain understanding of what's being asked of them, and a willingness to step up to the mark and to, serve in their duty. So this is one thing that we need to know. Even though these are scary times, even though there's, I was watching that video and there seems to be this growing, you know, there seem to be more and more service members, maybe than in previous um, military conflicts, that are having more and more misgivings. But let's not lose sight of the fact that there are, you know, military service members who know that enlisting, who know that being a part of the military is you have to be prepared for, you have to a certain degree be prepared for battle. This isn't to say that people who object aren't prepared and didn't get that same training, that same preparedness. But this is a reminder that if you are somebody who has joined the military and you are duty bound to answer the call, that's what you're probably going to do. And you're going to do it with pride. You're going to do it with your sense of duty. And definitely have a great deal of respect for that. So that might be what this card represents. So that's what to know, card one. Card two is, oh, why am I blinking? A new perspective. So let's take a look. Okay, so we have the Five of Wands. Take a look at the Five of Wands here. And this definitely just represents conflict in the Wands suit. If you're familiar, of course, with the Rider-Waite suit, kind of that iconic image of, five people with their wands in the air, going back and forth. Let's see. And Mars and Aries, I'm not sure you get more bellicose than Mars and Aries, as this card tends to represent. So I wonder what the new perspective would be, though. I mean, maybe this is a new perspective for me. It's just, this seems pretty standard as far as military activity. War is war. And there are people who are built to be a part of the military. There are people who, they have that sense of duty, and they're the ones. It's not all of us, but there are people who are put on this earth who have kind of that fighting spirit, or that spirit of being a almost like sacrificial sort of leader, or somebody who's willing to put their body on the line for something they believe in. The Wands suit is about passion. It's about more momentum. It's about expressiveness. It's about leadership. It's about putting yourself out there for what it is that you believe in, what it is that you're passionate about, I think. And it's just a reminder that I know that I tend to be in a lot of progressive or liberal spaces, a lot of kind of anti-war, perhaps even pacifistic spaces. And there are a lot of us who are peaceniks, who just don't believe in it, don't believe in war, you know. But there are people who do believe in war, and that's not necessarily even a bad thing, or maybe not even to the extent of believe in war. Now, there's some people who are war hawks, 100%. But for me, I guess anyway, it's a perspective of people who don't necessarily take pleasure in having to fight, but they don't give it a second thought if there's a cause that needs to be protected, that needs to be fought for if they've put themselves on the line for that. There are people who have that astounding amount of courage and they're not going to think twice about it. It's not a foolhardy just rushing into things. It's a readiness. It's a sense of a moral imperative that some people, and I do believe people in the military, or people who tend to gravitate toward the military, perhaps, they have this. Um, again, being a progressive person, when I think of things like the military, when I think of law enforcement, when I think of things like that, of late, my personal opinions about that have become less and less generous. And I have to remember that that doesn't apply to every single man or woman who is in the military, who either serves in the military or law enforcement for that matter. There are service members with deep, sincerely held principles who really care about their communities, who really care about their country, and this is their opportunity to protect their country, their opportunity to be of service to their country. And I guess that's a new perspective for me. Maybe that's common sense. If you're somebody who is a service member or somebody who has military members in your family and you happen to come across this video, please let me know what you think in the comments. And I guess if I guess it's not necessarily a surprise that tarot reader, woo-woo person, you know, I'm very kind of I would prefer there to not be war, but I do know that sometimes war has to be waged. Um, there's a phrase that just came to my mind, but I lost it because I think I heard Pete Hegseth say it, and that guy is a that guy's an idiot. But he is also he's also the head of the Department of Defense / War. So at this man's behest, service members who do happen to be principled are going to be pulled into this conflict. And again, I have a deep respect for the individuals, even if I don't respect the institutions, or at least the way those institutions are being administered. I always have a deep respect for the men and women who feel that call, who feel duty bound to, you know, duty bound to join the ranks and, you know, and act with their own personal conviction. So I guess this is a new perspective for me. When I do these advice from the universe readings, a lot of times the new perspective card, I think Spirit is kind of speaking directly to me, kind of challenging my own personal biases. And I think first and foremost, when I do these readings, I look at them as my own personal readings, but I put them up in hopes that they'll also resonate with others. So this is something that I need to remember. Just because I disagree with this war, just because I don't understand why we're there, and would just hate. Just because I have my own personal convictions against it doesn't mean, or rather, my personal convictions against it shouldn't cloud my judgment of those who do have to participate. People who've enlisted in the military, who, in their sense of duty, in their sense of justice, and through their own courage, they do have to, they do, they are a part of this war. They are a part of how it moves forward. And, I have a great deal of respect for that. It just makes me, really sad. But it's something that I have to remember. So that's the second, card number 2, new perspective. And card number 3 in a pool like this is an action step. So let's see what this is. 4 of Cups. 4 of Cups. My association of 4 of Cups I mean, a lot of times, even if I'm using a different deck, sometimes my mind will take me right back to the Rider-Waite Smith, and I'll be thinking about, the adolescent, the young person sitting under a tree, not paying attention. They've got three cups in front of them on the ground, and there's another offering from the universe that they're not paying attention to, whether they're rejecting that offer from the universe, whether they whether rejecting it because they don't want it, or they're rejecting it out of apathy, or whether they're at peace with what it is they already have, and that option they're willing to let pass because they don't need it. Um, Maybe this card represents trying to find a way to make peace with the things that maybe with the things that we don't quite have any control over. Or if we think of the cups, if we think of like the emotions and just relationships and love and things like that, I think the cups can represent just trying to, I think this here can represent trying to just have, don't allow, and I guess this is for me, I'm kind of losing my words here, but I think this is an opportunity for those of us who don't agree with this conflict to not allow our anger or disappointment in the current regime that we're living under, don't allow that to color our opinions of the service members, of the people who are being called on to wage this war. And it makes me think about, this is a little before my time in Vietnam, but it makes me think about the hostility that Vietnam vets came home to face. Um, the Vietnam War, of course, quagmire, one of America's biggest sort of military failures, um, for what history has to say about it. Um, and just kind of the ill will that Vietnam veterans were met with, and how unfair that was. On one hand, there's this, when there's an institution that you don't trust, or an institution that has crossed the line, on one hand, there are people up top who make the decisions. And there's also, people who fought in Vietnam. Not all of them were saints, not all of them were sinners. When you think of the military, when you think of any institution, it is the institution, but it also is an institution that's held up and administered by people who are often working with what they know at the time, especially if you are one of the troops and your job is to go where you're sent. Your job is to do what you're told. And there were people who went over there, young people, young men who, there were a variety of experiences that were had from what I've kind of understood from history. People who fought in Vietnam and their experiences with that war changed their outlook on war. There are people who, you know, went to that war, were lucky at all to come back. There are people who went to that war, maybe participated in things that were unjust, or things that, they never thought they would do. There's a variety of experiences. And while institutions are a collective sort of institution, the people who either serve to upkeep those institutions, or the are people who have to serve at the will and the whim of those institutions, you kind of have to think about how much control do they have, or how much of that institution represents them. People fight in wars that maybe they don't believe in, or maybe they fight and they don't necessarily know that they have the option not to. Or, of course, there's also consequences for, if you're a service member and you don't go and you don't fight or whatnot. There's all sorts of consequences. And I have to say again, I have no familiarity at all with, being member of the military or being in a military family. So I'm just kind of speaking from intuition, just kind of going off the top of my head. I think this card represents maintaining a sense of generosity towards the men and women who have to serve. Um, maybe trying to finding a way to, I'm losing my words. I think ultimately it's about not taking your frustrations in the institution out on the people who have to serve, the people who are, if you're a service member, on the front line, doing what you signed up to do, doing what you enlisted to do, it's, I guess it's just maybe keeping them in, if you're somebody who does thoughts and prayers, just keeping an open heart where these individuals are concerned. Maybe this is what this card represents. And I've rambled a lot. I've gone in and out, bobbed and weaved, that sort of thing. Um, it's based on these cards. Just let me know what you think if you got a different interpretation from how these cards play out. And that is my 3 card advice from the universe reading. What I know is that the military, if these service members are called upon to serve, by and large, that's what they have to do. And they'll do it because that's what they enlisted to do. And, they're adaptable. They have had that training that they need to be able to, carry out their mission. They can pivot as they need to, and they have to work with what they know. They're going on the communications that they're getting. So I think that's what to know represents. I think this new perspective, mostly a new perspective for myself, is to remember that even though I'm a peacenik, and it doesn't necessarily mean people who are military don't believe in peace. That's not what that means at all. But people who enlist, they have a certain conviction to where they're willing to protect and serve in the military if they're called upon to do that. A lot of service members don't think twice about it. Um, and it's not to say there's anything wrong with thinking twice about it, but we have our service members. They've enlisted because it's something they believe in, and even if I don't believe in it, I have to respect somebody else's convictions and respect the fact that they're willing to put themselves on the line for their convictions. And I do have a great deal of respect for that. So I guess this shouldn't be a new perspective so much as a reminder to me to calm down. And I guess the action step is to, keep our service members in our thoughts, and if we pray, in our prayers as well, and to err on the side of generosity when it comes to the individual service members. There's, I can only imagine what their families, what they're going through right now. They're being called up to a war that most citizens of the US don't agree with, don't even understand why it's happening, can't get a straight answer from our administration. And however we feel about that, we have to do our best to not allow that to color our opinions of the men and women who have to serve. And I guess that's what the Four of Cups, at least that's what it feels like the Four of Cups represents to me. Trying to be even killed, maybe resisting the urge to take the cup of bitterness or whatnot when it comes to them. And just kind of, just being willing to be generous, being willing to be, respectful and loving as far as our service members are concerned. So I've talked a blue streak here, and usually I like to pull a bottom of the deck card just to see the overall, I guess just the overall vibe, the overall temperature of the reading. Sometimes the bottom of the deck card will tie things together in an unexpected way, or maybe just kind of highlight the underlying energy of either my question or the underlying energy of Spirit's response. So let's see. Okay, so we have judgment. And let's see. Oh, but YouTube censorship. There's some little bit of nudity there. Um, Judgment represents just kind of acknowledging one's own feelings, acknowledging one's actions. And I think, again, as I mentioned before, the readings that I do, um, I don't I don't necessarily consider them collective readings. I'm reading for all the people in the zodiac sign, or all the people who are this, and all the people who are that. Mostly these readings are, I think, for myself, but I hope that the insights that I get that are communicating directly to me can also resonate with anybody who'd be watching. And I think this message of judgment for me is that I should do my best to reserve my judgment when it comes to people. I mean, my main concern, I mean, the reason for doing this reading was, what are military people thinking? I guess because of that YouTube video, maybe there's a part of me that was laboring under the assumption that service members are trying to conscientiously object in droves. It's so unpopular that even the military won't do it, and people are looking for a way to opt out and whatnot. And I don't think there's, at least I haven't seen anything that really suggests that that's the case. But I don't know. Um, so maybe my own feeling of, well, I wonder how unpopular this is with the service members. Maybe that's not the case at all. Maybe this reading is just kind of based on my own, knee-jerk responses, or my own just sort of personal biases. And I do have to be careful. It's one thing to have your own biases. I mean, everybody has them. It's one thing to have your own opinion about things, but I have to try and be careful not to overlay my own personal opinions you know, onto maybe a group of people or whatnot. So maybe this card of judgment, at least for me, is just kind of, taking a right sort of judgment. And again, since this is an initial sort of reading, I'm kind of doing these in real time. As I sit with the reading, it'll illuminate itself to me more and more. And I have a Substack that I usually post the longer form, just kind of readings, interpretations of the cards as they fall out. So I might have to sit with this a little bit longer as this particular card and its meaning unfolds itself further. But yeah, judgment, and just kind of now judgment in this deck is represented by Pisces, and just kind of the idea of see, just kind of the idea of reckoning with your own personal feelings, reckoning with your ideals. And I guess it's worth mentioning that even though, I mean, the major arcana cards in this particular deck, their their planetary association doesn't always align with how they're associated with in the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. So it's kind of different, I think. But anyway, this card could represent just sort of reckoning with my own personal feelings about something. And in this time of just so much discord in the world, don't look for more reasons to, for lack of a better way to put it, putting it bluntly, don't look for more reasons to hate somebody. Don't look for more reasons to judge someone. Um, Institutions are run by people, but ultimately people are just people. And they're working with what it is they know. They're doing the best they can, and have to be careful to not try to make the worst assumptions about people. And on one hand, maybe that part of me that was kind of wondering if there was kind of an uptick in um, military dissension as far as this particular war. Maybe that was based on my own personal judgments, my own personal feelings, a few internet rabbit holes I fell down. So a lot of times, what we're judging things on are only based on a small part of the picture. And so, don't necessarily leap to judgment. It's one thing to have an opinion, but don't allow that opinion, don't allow your own personal biases to cast a pall over an entire community or over an entire, population of people. And that's something that I think I'm really learning more on. It's not easy, especially if you've seen any of my previous videos. I discuss MAGA, people who are leaving MAGA, people who've been in MAGA, and just kind of what that feels like. And this might sound a little cliche, but there's so much talk, so much is being made of just kind of how polarized U.S. citizens are, as a population of people in the U.S., how polarized the citizenry is. And that polarization is not healthy. In fact, it is a major detriment to where we are right now. And we have to find a way to be less polarized. And it's not just as easy as just, it's not as easy as just kind of, we all just need to come together. You hear that a lot from even people who are, I guess, right leaning. Um, people who are, the standard bearers for this particular regime. They might use language like unity, but you can't just unify with something that maybe you don't believe in, but you have to find ways to see human beings as human beings. And there does need to be, I guess, solidarity for humanity, and not necessarily just rallying around a flag or rallying around, you know, just an idea. Um, I think I'm getting a little off topic here. I might do a timestamp on here because a rant's incoming just a little bit, and you don't have to listen to if you don't want to. But just kind of thinking about where we are as a nation, thinking about the polarization that's happening in the U.S. And there is definitely that need for us to, we have bigger fish to fry as a population here in the U.S. And we have more in common with the people we feel like we don't have anything in common with. Um, you know, when you think about different movements, political movements, when you think about political parties, when you think about the different ethnicities in the U.S., it seems like everybody is at loggerheads. That we have to find a way to get past certain things, to rally around the one thing we have in common. And I know this is going to sound cliche, our humanity. The fact that all of us, despite our ethnicity, despite our gender representation, our orientations, our religions, our political affiliations, we have something in common. And if you are not in the 1%, we are being we're being crushed by, just so many things. Capitalism, the late stage capitalism that we are kind of toiling in, our you know, standards of living are falling, cost of living is rising, wages aren't. Um, a lot of Americans are in dire straits financially, physically, health wise. And the infighting among the different identity groups, it's almost like a distraction. And the call for unity, or rather the call for us to find a way to coalesce, it isn't just about it's not a cliche. It's not about it. It's not for fluff. It's not for its own sake. It's that we really have to come together to make this world better, to make this country more livable, to hold to account, I'm just going to say it, the Epstein class, and all that that encompasses, the greed, the depravity, the just the things that are destroying our everyday lives. The person who voted MAGA, it feels like they're the enemy, but they might not be the enemy. They disagree on some things, or perhaps even they have fallen into a degree of You know, perhaps they hold some bigotries. And I think all of us also have to recognize maybe our own prejudices. And it is a moral imperative that we find a way to get past it because I feel like our survival depends on it. And this isn't to say that disagreements go away. This isn't to say that we, you know, set aside everything that is different about us. But we have to find a way to prioritize the things that are similar, the things that we have in common. And we can celebrate the things that make us different. We don't have to compromise our convictions just for the sake of peace, just for the sake of going along and getting along. But we really do have to find a way to connect to each other because we don't have time, I don't think, to stay in our own silos. There's just so much work that has to be done. So I think that's one of the things that's coming through. And I've been getting a lot of readings that suggest finding a way to be in coalition with those of us who are different but the same. Somebody might be MAGA or somebody might be progressive, but both of you might be working class. And I think have to find a way to work toward a common good and don't let our differences keep us from finding a way to do that. So I think that's what's coming through in these messages. We don't necessarily have the things that we all rally around, monoculture. I think the last vestige of that is something like Super Bowl or whatnot. But by and large, we aren't going to just rally around the flag for its own sake. And I do think that's what this administration is kind of counting on. Um, you know, Starting an illegal war of aggression, hoping that it would galvanize the citizens of the U.S. into just blindly following um, this regime. And I don't think that's going to happen um, because it's it's counterproductive. It's not. It it's. I think I'm getting a little emotional on this one, but I'm going to try and put a timestamp in this because I'm just ranting. And if you stayed to the end of that, thank you for listening. If not, I understand. I'm getting a little all over the place here, but I think that's what this reading is about. Not finding ways to, not allowing differences of our opinions to keep us from seeing the humanity in other people, even the humanity in people who are part of institutions that we don't respect, or institutions that might not always be worthy of our respect, or institutions that we have our own personal grievances against. We shouldn't allow those feelings to color our view of the individuals themselves. And I think that's just kind of what my takeaway is from this. Please let me know if you've got a different interpretation. And I have rambled enough. And I thank you so much for still being here, if you are. Or if you dropped off, probably won't see this part of it. But I appreciate you listening and watching. And if this is your sort of cup of tea, give me a thumbs up if you like. And if you're into these readings, please consider subscribing. And until I see you again, take care. This has been Karmic Fixer Tarot, and I'll talk to you again soon.